King's Landing, interestingly enough, is really Tyrion's story, despite the fact that he spends almost all of it in a jail cell.
Yes, he's certainly the one who's driving what's happening and is at the center of everything, and everything sort of ties back to him in a lot of ways. So.
I mean, what's interesting with him is, of course, is his story. I mean, they talk about Storm of Swords kind of taking a season and a half, kind of. And it sort of does, but with Tyrion, I mean, he's one of the ones whose story basically goes all the way through the ends of Storm of Swords. So basically, they took 2 seasons to tell his whole story. And I think that's an important lesson for how they might adapt going forward into sort of the rest of A Feast for Crows for those characters who have not even really started their journeys in that novel. And A Dance with Dragons, as they've talked about the fact that they will combine them together, basically, which is perfectly doable.
Obviously, they were originally. I mean, they are one story. Mostly, they're contemporaneous.
Yeah.
There's just a back third of Dance with Dragons that kind of stretches beyond A Feast for Crows. Other than that, the events happen more or less at the same time.
Yeah. So I would say that in a lot of cases, I mean, it's an interesting thing for the 5th season adaptation, because I think a lot of people are expecting, and I mean, even Dave and Dan said, I mean, they were concerned about how they were going to do the season 4 or season 5 storyline with Feast for Crows and Dance Dragons, and it has a lot of material which is a bit more contemplative, a bit more internal. A Feast for Crows in particular is beautiful in its sort of very thematic unity, as I've put it before, but it's all the characters kind of have the same thing going.
I mean, it's a lot quieter than A Storm of Swords. So.
But they've said in recent interviews that they, you know, when they broke it down, they just saw how much story there is to tell. So they're you know, obviously they would say that regardless. They're not going to say, yeah, it's going to suck or whatever. But I think they have a story which they feel will work. And from what we see of what we've heard about the casting, they're casting all these characters from A Feast for Crows.
On the other hand, they are doing a little bit of the same that George ended up doing, because as far as we can see, they're focusing entirely on Dorne as the additional new area, and not the Ironborn. I mean, both Dorne and the Ironborn storylines are introduced in A Feast for Crows.
Yeah.
And they're either cutting the Ironborn or they're holding it for later.
Well, there's a possibility we just haven't heard that they're casting. Yeah, the fact is that
the list was pretty long. Extensive as it was.
It seems hard to see how they could surprise. They could do something. I mean, I think the obvious course would be something to do with the Greyjoy troop getting back to the Iron Islands and things developing from there. So all this to say is that Tyrion and Jon as well, who isn't even done with Storm of Swords.
No, they were able to certainly stretch them over the whole 2 seasons.
Yeah, so they'll be able to do a lot, I think. And that's part of the reason why some fans are kind of skeptical of the idea of a good 7 seasons. Because if certain storylines can be stretched out so far, and I can see at least one storyline in A Feast for Crows that I could see kind of playing out over, and A Dance with Dragons as well, over a couple of seasons, not just a single season.
I mean, Tyrion's story doesn't feel stretched out.
It doesn't
either. I don't think.
They have the odd thing with Tyrion, but you know, and that's the thing, that he has the most lines, I think, of the season. So it's just a fascinating thing when he's in the cell so long.
Yeah, well, here was the Orson speech.
The Orson speech.
That's half of his material.
It's a lot of, do you recall how many lines when you translated it? How long that was?
I don't. I sort of I've tried to put that out of my mind.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of lines.
I mean, he performs well. He does good stuff, Peter Dinklage, this season. And he is, again, nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I mean, the HBO strategy has been to always just use the Best Supporting category and the Guest Actor category for certain actors. But I think it seems odd to me that they would do that, but they wouldn't just say, yes, Peter Dinklage is the star of a show.
Yeah.
And put him there, and then basically give some other people a chance to get nominated. On the other hand, realistically speaking, this season is going to be Breaking Bad's season, although, you know, it's done. This is the final chance to kind of reward it. So you think they're taking both? They're taking a lot. I won't say we'll take everything, but Breaking Bad's probably taking quite a bit. What to say about his... he acts well. His highlight his peak is certainly episode 6, I think. His personal peak.
No, I would still put it at 7.
Just a bit of Oberyn?
Yeah. I just find that it's easier, I think, for an actor to act out more as he does in the trial. I mean, the delivery and all that is obviously good, but I think that's easier material.
Fair enough.
Than the silent acting that he does in 7, where it's just his expressions as the story is being told to him. So I found that more impressive.
Yeah,
I found it was the only time I really felt emotional about Tyrion.
No, it's a testament to both actors and Pedro Pascal helping to carry. That's a chapter that's an episode, a scene where we managed to get a mood across from the dialogue and the way it's delivered and the way they're responding to one another. That gets a mood across.
The
direction, everything was really good for that one.
So.
And I mean, great work by Brian Cogman for the 6th episode with the trial, and then from David and Dan for doing a great job with this one, and including some stuff that's new. You know, what about what I want? It stands out. It's a great line, and it's not for the books. They came up with
I mean, they changed the context because obviously in the books, Oberyn's offer to be Tyrion's champion does not come as a surprise to Tyrion. It's something they've discussed, and he does it at the trial, and it's a very different feeling. It would have been great to have it that way as well, have it in front of but
I think Cersei's because I think one of the places that everyone often says, and even critics keep saying this, that one of the places that the show is at its strongest is often when it's. There are times when it goes off the rails, but many times it's when two characters are just talking to one another.
Yeah.
Orson, repeatedly going to the well in the 2nd season on Tywin Arya, where first time was fantastic, and then after that, okay, we saw this, and where's the development progression, or Ygritte and Jon in the 2nd season, where they got stuck into this rut of just her insulting and coming on to him, and coming on, insulting, coming on, and it felt kind of repetitive. But here, there are then scenes that are just tremendous interpersonal scenes. Ramsay and Enrique at the bath, for example, was a great one. There's Sansa and Littlefinger at the end,
Sansa and
Lysa. It's great when they're able to kind of get that to go together, right? And I mean, but I think the big problem, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is for Tyrion Shay for me.
And Tyrion in general, and specifically highlighted by Tyrion and Shay,
is the fact that it doesn't feel like some of it doesn't. That relationship doesn't make sense to me, and it's not. They never get into it, and I think they shortchanged it, and I think it was a mistake on their part. And I keep thinking about as I said, no one ships Tyrion Shay. I mean, someone doubtless does, but it's not an overwhelming thing. And as you said, when we were looking at Twitter, people, oh yay, and oh so what? People didn't really care.
It's not like people care in the books either, but the problem was that they tried to make something of it that it wasn't. They wanted to make them sort of more two equals, and I don't see what was equal about them.
No.
It was just, Shay the funny whore, that was only boiled down to her being a bit smart or whatever. And they, in some cases, you have to allow a relationship or a connection between two characters to be focused, where one character is sort of the dominant perspective into the story. They were never meant to be equally interesting or focused on in the same way.
But I think what you do get is, in the books, you really buy his infatuation.
Yes, because it is all focused on Tyrion. You can tell that Shay is she's exactly what he wants. She makes herself exactly what he wants. So her personality and her desires are very much irrelevant, because she knows they're irrelevant to Tyrion. He just wants to live in this fantasy, and she is his fantasy. And everything has to do with the fact that she's feeding this idea that he has, and that he allows himself to be fooled by, that this is a loving relationship. So everything has to do with how this affects Tyrion, which turns into an interesting sort of, because ultimately what happens to Tyrion has a lot to do with the fact that Shay actually breaks out of that idea of doing everything for Tyrion, because when Tyrion is going down, she's not going to go down with him. She's going to try and save herself. And a lot of people obviously dislike the character as a gold digger, but she's a poor common girl in Westeros. Probably didn't exactly embark on the career, the illustrious career of a prostitute out of choice. She ended up with that life and trying to make the best of it. Of course, it's perfectly natural. You can see if you're, just... I can't say I liked her in the book or anything.
You'd have to be able and willing to put yourself in that shoes, basically, and see, like, what else does she have to do? And you can say, oh, well, morality, certain things you shouldn't do, like betray a person who loves you, and it's sort of... And then what? Die with them? I mean, it's a lovely thing, it's a lovely sentiment to say, but the reality is quite different. And I think
she sees a chance that she could still get out of this, do decently for herself, get some, a house, some jewels, and whatever. And for me, they made Shay on the show more unsympathetic.
I can see that, because it goes from her being madly in love to taking the wounds of him saying, you're a whore, which she kept saying, I'm a whore, I'm a whore, I'm a whore. And when he throws it back at her, suddenly...
I mean, she refuses to listen when he tells her, look, this is dangerous, I can't have you here. She absolutely refuses to listen to that. So he has to go the route of driving her away. And then she becomes so angry. I mean, crimes of passion happen. But she does try to get him killed because he hurt her.
I mean, the thing with me is...
Or she aids in getting him killed. Is it so strange that he wants to kill her?
Yeah, to me, it's a lot of... And it's heavy-handed behavior, because the first season, he tells his story about Tisha, and yes, he named Tisha, people were right. I mean, it's more, and we'll discuss that more for those who are wondering, but, and she concluded, well, of course she was a prostitute. She wouldn't, no one but a prostitute would have, gotten into that relationship with you, and so on, right?
Well, especially sort of right after, being chased by some men, almost raped, and of course...
no one who's been nearly raped would then turn around and fall in love with somebody, and that's her cynicism, and that's her... And then they turn her around and make her fall in love, and be irrational, like, be completely irrational about it. Wanting, and I mean, it just feels false to have her... And we'll run away together and live in poverty? Is he going to be writing letters for people in Pentos? I mean, what is if he's cut off from the family?
I mean, it's almost as if they have Shay living the fantasy that Tyrion is living in the books.
She's far more romantic than he is, basically, ultimately.
She's the one who's duped by the idea that they can be in love.
No, and I find that reversal... I find it problematic because, again, in a certain way, it takes something away from Tyrion, who Tyrion is the ultimate sort of thwarted romantic. And funnily enough, both Tyrion and Jaime share a lot in that particular respect. Romanticism romanticism in the series is a big topic of interest of mine. Just from my literary studies and such, and I just romanticism, not just romantic, like, I'm not talking Harlequin romance. I'm talking romanticism as in the 19th century romanticism and the ideas therein, and that clearly appeal to George. And George himself says that he is something of a disillusioned romantic. He's constantly and you can read in his early literature. There's a lot of romanticism in it, very clear. It's wearing it on its sleeves. I mean, he quotes Shelley in A Fever Dream. I mean, the ship is called Ozymandias, or is renamed to Ozymandias later on, and it's a big, Byron, I think, is mentioned. I think, he met Byron in the course of a novel, or one of the characters did, and it's a big topic of interest, and I think you can see it running all through A Song of Ice and Fire. You have the romanticism of the past. You have the romanticization of these sort of figures like Arthur Dane and Lyanna, and you have things like
this preoccupation with ruins and decay, and all of this. The grandeur of the past that's been lost,
and for Tyrion, he romanticizes his own past. He romanticizes Tisha and that situation, and it's like, because that is his golden moment. That is the perfect time. That couple of weeks was the happiest he ever was,
Yeah.
and he keeps looking back to it, and then it gets destroyed. Shay is the romantic here, more than anything. She starts off as hard-nosed, oh, just a prostitute, of course.
Yeah.
And she's now the one who's kind of hopelessly in love and completely unrealistic about it. And it takes away from Tyrion because he's the one who then is the sane one. I mean, Tyrion in the novel does consider, I mean, he tries to get her away or like what to do to kind of put her aside now he has Sansa and so on, but he never really brings himself to it.
I mean, he's too, it's sort of reliving some of that with, he's fooling himself that he's reliving some of what he had with Tisha.
Yeah.
And he can't really help himself. He just wants to be forgetting about his problems and sort of just losing himself in this relationship.
I think they sort of taken something away from Tyrion.
I mean, they've taken
and made him
a lot away, I think, because I said they take away that, his naivety and romantic naivety.
Take away his darker elements.
They take away his darker elements, so he becomes this middle of the road, nice kind of guy. Fellow, yeah. They're taking away both the softer sides and the harder sides.
Yeah, they've kind of made him kind of bland, and I mean it's Peter Dinklage does fine with it, and I think on a sort of superficial, just sort of smart dialogue level, it's fine. But if you dig deep into the character, he's starting to become rather different than what the character is in the novels.
A thinner character,
and it's worth.
I mean, here they got the ending.
Yeah, the ending. That's
by not having Tisha figure into it, by making it all about the present problem with Shay.
Yeah, for those of you who've not, I mean, if you watch the show, you've heard about Tisha in the first season, but you're probably still thinking Tisha. Well, I mean, her name is mentioned. The story is told about how this young girl being chased by men, he rescues her. Jamie rescues her, but he helps take care of her, and then they fall in love, and they get married, and then Tywin finds out, and he hands her over to, Jamie says, oh, actually, she was a prostitute I hired for you, and Fulver hands him off, Tywin hands him off to the barracks, to prove a point, but she's a prostitute, and that sort of is this thing that he holds against his father, and it's a really dark moment in his past. And the big thing in the novel is when Jamie comes to rescue Tyrion, he tells him, I owed you a debt. And what is it? Tisha. And he says, she was never a prostitute. She was exactly what she seemed, just an innocent girl. Fulver convinced me I had to tell you that it was a prostitute, but it would be for your own good. And that makes a very sharp break between Tyrion and Jamie. I mean, he smacks Jamie and he says, next time we meet on the battlefield, we'll try to kill one another.
And he also tells Jamie certain unpleasant things that are going to haunt Jamie.
Yeah, Cersei.
Tells her that she's been sleeping with all these people.
And Kettle Black and Moon Boy, for all he knows. Yes. Moon Boy being a jester that we never actually meet.
Kettle Blacks being the Sirs not appearing in this TV series so far.
So that break, I think, is essential. I think
he also says he kills Joffrey, right?
And he also claims he killed Joffrey.
Okay, so
which is obviously untrue, but it's just he's trying to hurt him. And I think to some degree, Jamie kind of understands that that's probably not true.
Yeah.
But he is haunted by the Cersei bit. And they've completely changed that relationship, but we'll get into that more. But I think, for the most part, by weakening things and softening it and making it and leaving him something happy, at least my brother loves me and he saved me and we're leaving on good terms. The motivation for why Tyrion, and there's even people saying, like, why did Tyrion go up there? How did Tyrion find his way into the Tower of the Hand, and why did he do it? What was he hoping to accomplish?
Because when he goes there in the books, he is, deeply distraught by this confrontation with Jamie, and
I mean, the funny thing is if you think about it, imagine Shay wasn't there. Imagine it was Tywin in bed alone.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to go grab a knife or a dagger or a crossbow to kill his father. He wanted to come like, why did you do all this? And all Tywin has to shout is, guards, what?
Yeah.
So the Tyrion, it was almost, whereas the Tyrion of the novel is going up there with fairly high odds of planning to kill his father, or at least get a weapon and force him to tell him certain things before he goes away.
And Shay is very much, as here, a casualty along the way, and that when it's much colder in the novels, he finds her there. She doesn't try to kill him in the first place. I mean, they weakened he just very coldly goes up and basically strangles her, even though she is trying to, plead with him and trying to.
She calls him. Does she say? Is it when does he start strangling her? When she tries to say, my giant.
Yes, I think so.
My giant or my lion.
Yeah.
And I don't know. The silence, the complete silence, was a mistake. To me, it leaves her such a question mark. It really undersells. So, and then to go from that over to Tywin, like everything is fine as far as the performance goes, but it feels a little hollow when you know like why horror matters so much.
It's not because, yes, he used it to drive away Shay, and it sort of drew the wedge between them, but it has a lot more resonance in the novel. So much more.
So the depth of it is lost, and it. I mean, the performances are fine, but the depth, the sort of the full weight of tragedy and the way it goes back into the past is a thing that they often just kind of elide.
The past in general is just not
there.
And
it feels to me, I mean, Tisha, as I said, they mentioned the first season, and then her name is never mentioned ever again. Each season has a reference to her. I get, sometimes quite oblique. But from my point of view, I mean, from seeing what people do on Twitter, how people ask questions of me, it's not enough in a show like this to expect people to remember. And they didn't even put it on the Previously On. They could have. They could have focused that story in the Previously On and shared something about it, but they didn't do that. So I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot. And I've said this, I think, in our review, that they maybe intended to make more of it, but when it came to it, they found that, oh, well, every season we ended up cutting out any references to it, like we just left just one, and we figured, oh, we'll get to it next year, and we'll start building it up. And they didn't do that. And then when they come to this season, they kind of said, geez, we kind of didn't set it up, we're going to have to drop it. And it's a mistake. It's a simple mistake on their part.
I also think, to be honest, that they felt that, oh, well, we try to invest so much in this Tyrion-Shay relationship, so we should make that front and center instead.
Yeah. Which is, given the fact that I don't think anyone was horribly terribly invested in the Shay Tyrion. Again, I don't want to be. Most people were not particularly invested in it. Let's put it that way. From what I can see on Twitter, what people see on the forum, people weren't generally invested in it. They care about Tyrion. They don't care about Shay. They care about Tyrion. They don't care about Tyrion.
I'm sure there's some reviewers going on about the poor sex workers somewhere. But if anyone uses sex workers in reviews, we're talking about Game of Thrones. Well, I shouldn't say anything rude about them, but
you don't read the reviews.
No, I don't read the reviews. Just please fucking stop.
The end, the last bit of Varys is interesting, cute, clever bit, sort of. The other big change, of course, is the whole circumstance of Tyrion going up there. I mean, obviously, he's murderous in the novel, and threatens Varys, and we know how strong he is. He's very strong in the novels. I mean, he's a dwarf, but his upper body seems to be fairly normal and very strong. I mean, he does various things that suggest he's quite strong. And so you could very well believe he could murder Varys with his bare hands. And yes, Varys kind of gives a fairly half-assed protest as he gives him directions. But I think at that point we have to assume in the novels he's decided, I assume, in the novels he's decided, well, there's no way I can avoid this. Maybe there'll be something useful will come of it.
Yeah.
His taking off of when hearing the bells, like he's preparing to go back and then hears the bell, like, oh god, he killed somebody.
Somebody important, probably.
Yeah, I'm going to take off. Could have been Cersei for all he knew. That's a funny thing, actually. I don't know. It's fairly strong material, but I think the really big highs of what they could have gotten.
It's just when you know that it could have been stronger. You always sort of, you can feel the loss of it.
There's Jaime who helps and so on, but again, they change that relationship. They change the relationship with Cersei, and it's a lot of the choice of kind of having him fall back a bit from. He does not have the arc that he has from the novels.
No.
In the novels, there's a distinct change in Jaime after his harrowing sort of journeys.
But here they have him show up in King's Landing much earlier. He's not there he shows up after.
Yeah.
Or does he show up before the trial by combat, but he's not...
Before the trial, yeah. But Tyrion doesn't recognize him, and he doesn't meet him.
Here they have him here longer, and they basically have him treading water in terms of character development.
Yeah. Treading water quite is a pretty good way of putting it. And again, I mean, more than him, it's Cersei who kind of, as we said in our last review, the complete turnaround, the 180, and like, you can't say you can't go, well, because her story is pretty much spot on the same.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing that has happened to her that changes from what's happened to her in a novel, and yet she does something completely 100%.
Which they don't build up to even. I mean, it's a completely different character, it's acted in a completely different way, and, you know, all of that. But even so, even taking into account all of those things, there's no explaining that change.
Yeah, they treated it as if George flipped the coin about how she was going to do it, and it landed on heads, but for us it's going to land on tails. She's going to do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's one of the... And again, other than that 15 seconds where I thought, wow, she's really playing Cersei like Cersei ought to be played.
That was 10 seconds.
Well, maybe it's 10 seconds. I thought that was... Because again, the thing is you here it's not so much kind of say, oh, the book is better, book is better, book is better. It's that they followed the book so very closely, and then they decided to have their cake and eat it too by saying, and now we're going to disregard everything else and have her just do something completely different. And it doesn't feel like if you constructed a character a certain way, you would expect consistency in how you portray the character. And then when you suddenly decide, well, let's do a completely hollow, meaningless thing, because maybe they love the idea of flipping around that sex scene.
Yeah, I think it was all about that. They wanted to have that one mirrored, and, you know, damn logic, damn character development, they were gonna get it.
This is a season where there's a lot of things where there's, you know, we've plot holes.
Yeah.
Genuine plot holes where they kind of decide to do their own thing and ignore, you know, the realities around it. Like, you know, Arya and the Hound at the Bloody Gate. Like, they want to do this thing and they don't think it through and they don't care. Like, they don't, viewers won't care. And I'm sure many viewers don't, but if you want people to treat it as a work that you can look at critically, but you could take seriously and break it down and study it, then you have to care about the people who do that. If you don't care, if it's just entertainment, and there's no pretense to art, then I guess it's fine.
You're basically pretending that, oh, you just watch it from week to week and you don't go back, you don't look at character arcs or anything.
Yeah.
It just gets hollow.
Yeah. So I think, although they structured things fairly well this season, there's certain things that they decided to do within that structure which were just...
Yeah.
And it's becoming, I mean, I think it's become more common from previous seasons.
Yes, it has. I think
so the first season obviously is pretty much spot on, drawn for the book, but then...
But the idea of shoving characters into positions just because we want them to do this, and we want them to do it now, how are we going to get them there?
Forget it, people won't notice.
Shove them that way.
Let the fans defend us by coming up with a cockamamie, complicated ideas for how to explain the psychology of a character, why it's subtly different enough that they can do something.
Or like, you know, how to explain that the Lannisters have no gold left and no one's noticed.
Yeah, 3 years. I mean, to me, that's like just another take on the whole Zorro Doxos bit that they created, where he was in fact poor, or rather he had no money at all, and it was all lies, and he basically tricked people to thinking he was wealthy.
I mean, I like this grand conspiracy of the Westerlands that must exist, where apparently all mines across the Westerlands, it's not just the Lannister mines, ran dry 3 years ago or within some period, and apparently none of the Westerlords talk to each other.
None of the miners talk to anyone. None of the gold merchants. No one is talking. It's not a feasible thing. It's a complete...
Apparently everyone has to report to Tywin, and he just says, all right, let's not talk about that.
Yeah, it's bull. There's no... I mean... It's one of those things you can't look at at all. And I just thought it was so stupid to them.
At the very least, as stupid as it was, they could have, we discussed that, they could have used that in the Cersei-Tywin confrontation. She could have threatened to reveal...
that instead.
Instead of revealing the incest, which is going to fuck up for her kids royally.
Yeah.
Unintended.
Well, it's a hollow threat. She doesn't really mean to do it. Well, what's the point of making the threat? She comes in and she's convinced that she's won, and... Dan Weiss in the Inside the Episode said she won. She beat Tywin. She checkmate. He was not going to push because of that.
No, exactly. Tywin would not recognize a hollow threat.
Yeah.
Tywin Lannister.
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyone remember the Rains and the Tarbecks?
Very briefly, I have the Tyrells here, and I was speaking about the Tyrells. They disappear.
Oh,
That's a funny thing. We were discussing and we were talking about characters and we were talking about Marjorie, and then it dawned on me, she doesn't have a line after, I believe, episode 5. So half the season you see her a couple times, but she's silent.
And it was the same, not as radically the last season. They also disappeared towards the end.
Yeah,
it's like they wanted to build up them. They wanted to have more ability for them to interact by casting Marjorie older and all of that, and they can't seem to actually get them into the story.
Yeah. I mean, I kept saying, with Mace, where they turn him into this ridiculous buffoon, and it's such a waste of a fine actor. And I mean, why not have some scenes between, father and daughter? I mean, have them talk about what's going on. Have them discuss, do you really believe that Tyrion poisoned, Joffrey? And maybe Mace reveals that, well, he doesn't care. It's Tywin wants this, or they could have done some more stuff to flesh them out, to flesh out the family, to build them up. And it's a thing.
The last thing we see from a Tyrell at all speaking is Mace in episode 6, right? The council scene. Or is that 7? No, that's 6.
Well, 6 the council, and he speaks on the court when he's judging as well.
Yeah, well, that's 6 as well. Okay,
that's 6. Yeah. But then 7 he doesn't speak, I believe. No. And then, now it's it.
Yeah.
He's present for a few scenes, but he doesn't talk. And again, this is one of those things where you say, oh, we have limited time. Well, first off, everyone's noticed that 6 or 7 of these episodes are really short compared to previous seasons. And you can say, yes, episode 9, budget, episode 10, they're extra long, took some of that, but they're still quite short. And you can't think, a couple of minutes more to kind of flesh out this, to build up this as a story element for the future. I mean, we talked about how, I think in the 3rd season, you kind of wonder, why weren't they bringing up Dorne more often? Because they could have, they had opportunities to do it.
Or even here, we could perhaps have brought up Dorne in episode 10.
Dorne's response to Oberyn being dead, setting up some sense the structure has been really problematic, and someone made a really great point.
Well, foreshadowing,
but it's structural, because someone made a really great point that they've done this whole thing, and it happens again and again this particular season, where there's some big thing happening right at the end of the episode, a big cliffhanger, a big plot turn, but rather than seeding those characters who are going to be involved in this through that episode, in which at the end there will be this big turn, they ignore them, and then you're suddenly thrown into a couple of minutes prior to the big turn. So,
certainly episode 8 is a great example of that, or a great example, not
episode 8,
a horrible example of that.
Episode 8, 3/4 of the episode is other stuff, and then right at the very end is when they, rather than as they've done in the past, sometimes they would do a chunk of a story partway through, and then they pick it up again, and they go into, they just kind of make a block of it. And I can see the appeal of it in some ways, but it does lead structurally, it leads to this weirdness where you get scenes that feel like they should be bigger that become small. And the classic example is Tyrion with Tywin and Shay. It's like 6 minutes, and it's so sudden, and it's so unbuilt up. You don't really see Jaime's thought process that leads him to decide to rescue his brother. You don't see his contacting Varys. You don't see anything like that. It's just suddenly he's there.
They've gotten so fond of just shock and surprise.
Yeah.
They just want everything to be, oh, this is a surprise, this is a twist, this is a twist, this is a turn.
And especially in this final episode, I mean, I thought it was alright, but I didn't think about it structurally. And structurally, it is a problem, but basically, they just save all these shocks, and then boom, 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 shock after shock. Feels a little wrong. Artificial, and there's definitely an artifice to it, and partly it's the source material. Like Storm of Swords is full of shocking turns towards the end, and I mean they kept out one of them. I don't know. They have a big task. They have absolutely a big and difficult task. translating this to the screen.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. They have been more successful in other times, I think. The finales always end up feeling overstuffed, I guess.
Yeah.
Although my recollection is that the finale of the first season was pretty much spot on. I haven't watched it in a few months, but it's pretty spot on, I think. But second, third, fourth, they kind of ended up stuck with filling too many things in, and
I think the only complaint we did have one, I think, about the finale of the first season was the fact that we get this one very brief shot of Arya leaving King's Landing, I think, which felt like they should just have...
Why bother?
Why bother, basically.
Yeah.
Because they were still stuck on the whole, we have to do every character in the finale.
Yes, I recall this. Is the other thing we had to complain about, like, for, like, the second season is... And the thing is, they did it this season, basically.
Yeah.
Everyone had to get caught up on.
Yeah.
And they couldn't say, well, episode 8 was the end of this person's story. We don't need to see them again.
Well, they did with Sansa.
Sansa's the one
veil,
example.
at least, they left.
Yes. Which is wise. That's the right way to do it. Like, why feel you have to call back to them?
Yeah.
It would have been nice, however, speaking of the veil, it would have been nice. This is some reference to the veil business in King's Landing. Some reaction, something. Like Littlefinger sends that he's got it all in hand.
Yeah.
It's just to help give the sense that the story's all connected. But I don't know. When I saw those criticism and discussion, and I mean, various critics were bringing up how I think one of AV Club does 2 reviews. They have a newbie review and they have an expert review. And the newbie review, I think, gave it like a B or B plus, and they commented it was like so overstuffed. And I kind of pondered and like, yeah, it worked for me in the sense that I've read everything and I can hold it all in my head, and
it's not all new material, so you kind of you recognize it, you can process it. Okay, this fits in here, that fits in with that. It's not coming out of nowhere. But when it literally comes out of nowhere for people, yeah, I can see it working even less successfully.
Speaking of coming out of nowhere, Oberyn was, for a lot of fans, they had no idea he was coming, and I think clearly very popular. Came out
Well, if they had paid any attention to interviews and such before, they should have known that they were certainly building up Pedro Pascal as the next big actor on the show. And
he lived up to it. He did a fantastic job. So, but the complaints about episode 8 still stand for us. It's they just botched it.
Again, there were things about how the introduction went that I was unhappy with. I think that the focus on using the brothel so damn much, having them actually move in there, when we joke about that, and yes, then they're actually in there. They were overselling the character.
They were overselling that stuff.
And I thought that it did feed into some of his acting.
I suppose.
I felt that maybe there were bits about episode 2 in particular.
Yeah.
One less so in retrospect. I'm fine with that. 2, I had a problem. I think 2 is the most problematic. The extremely antagonistic public interaction with Tywin and Cersei just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at something like episode 5, his interaction with Cersei there, which is much more what I would have expected.
Yeah.
But by the time you got the back half of 3, after the stupidity of having Tywin walk into a brothel, which is just whatever.
I mean, not that Tywin was a stranger to brothels, but he
doesn't conduct official business there.
No.
The idea that he would walk in to have a chat with Oberyn there is just dumb.
Yeah.
Their interaction there I liked.
Yeah. No, the interaction is always
The interaction is fine. I thought they had started toning down the overly swaggering aggressiveness of Oberyn. It worked better for me. Episode 5, the fact that, I have to sort of mentally block out Cersei from the scene, and the stupidity of her interaction with Oberyn and such, but he's perfectly fine there.
Yeah.
And by then I'm sort of, really liking his performance. Then you get episode 6 with the council scene, which is really good as well.
Yeah. He's great with the body language, the posture.
The body language, the posture, everything. Episode 7, I mean, man, he really got some good scenes there.
No, he really got a great run.
They did some really good scenes, actually.
Yeah, nobody did do. And credit to them. I mean, they did some really good stuff there.
Wish they hadn't done episode 2.
Episode 2, and I just wish they hadn't botched episode 8.
Yes.
I stand by it. They botched it.
Yeah.
It's just bad choices all around for how they did that one.
Yeah.
They really, it was underwhelming.
And then they could also have used Indira Varma a little better as Ilaria, and not.
She didn't show up at all in the final episode. I was sure that we're gonna at least see that.
No.
See her taking his body back, or some dark words about, Dornish revenge. Something to hint. No, she disappears.
And I wasn't like how they wrote her in general. I felt like they very much watched her in Rome and decided to sort of write this bit overwrought character from it. A little sort of typecasting.
It's quite different from the character in all.
It is,
it's kind of funny. I mean, not the sexiness, because she is bisexual and lusty and has had bastards and is not a proper woman, and yet all her interactions with people are perfectly proper. She seems polite and unassuming and doesn't really. It's Oberyn who makes all the waves.
She's not making waves in public.
Yeah, she doesn't challenge people. She doesn't.
So the way they had her acting,
it's kind of funny. I don't mind. It's fairly, to me, like a relatively small point, but it's just like, given how often they change things. Like, I mean,
I'm just concerned if they're using her next season.
Petty stuff for me, like not having Lady Blackmont not having a lady leading the group.
Not having it be Oberyn's mother who took him.
Not having it be Oberyn's mother, but making it his father, the Prince of Dorne. I mean, it's one of the distinguishing things from Dorne that it's a more egalitarian society in terms of the genders. It's more equal. Women and men can rule equally. There is no notion that there is something wrong with it.
And they basically eradicated that.
They had basically, at a whim, just got done away with it, and it's really strange.
And it's even more concerning now that we're saying they're looking for. I mean, we don't know that Arianne isn't in, but we have only seen casting for Trystane. Is he going to be there?
Trystane is mentioned, and they have Quentin isn't mentioned as well.
No.
Again, the list that leaked is not confirmed, and it's certainly not a complete list of actors. I mean, that it's. On the other hand, it is a very long list of characters, and you're feeling they're probably quite close to being full. Now, that said, the names that they left off are probably going to be as likely as not. I mean, there are probably lots of little minor roles, but there's probably some significant ones that they didn't put up to open casting.
It's true.
But they are approaching actors, and that is happening separately.
Yeah. I'm concerned that they're cutting that aspect, though.
Of the gen, I don't know why it's just a nice detail, and it's something that I think annoys me, because I mean it's one of the things where George very deliberately sets out a difference, and it's actually a key plot point for that matter. It's a key plot point for what happens in the Feast for Crows. That Dorne has succession laws that ignore gender. It's just birth order.
And I also just don't want to see a very aggressive Ilaria.
No, that's the thing.
Because she's very much the Catelyn of.
Yeah, she just plays the same role as Catelyn. Now, mind you, don't forget that Catelyn in the first season.
They killed them all.
Kill them all, and they silence her as well. She doesn't talk about, so they've kind of turned her around there, and now they're doing the same to Laura. And they seem to feel like, oh well, wanting to just making peace and sort of just living with your losses is boring, and I think it's not. There's a certain strength to it when you realize the costs.
Yeah.
The cost of vengeance and revenge.
Yes, it's very much a big theme. A
big theme in the novels, and it's.
And some characters decide they're just not willing to pay it. They feel that they paid enough, and it's just not going to get better if you keep on that path. And.
So they still have it there thanks to people like Arya, but it's not as strong. And I mean, obviously they kind of choose their own themes, and they've kind of mocked the idea of themes in general and sort of having thematic focus. They've kind of mocked the idea. We're not writing 5th grade essays or something like that. That's what they said. We don't want to lay it down like this is the theme. But at the end, every season they start talking about themes. And so I mean, you can't avoid themes when telling a story. Themes exist.
I mean, it's one thing that yes, I'm not particularly fond either of stories that are written specifically because it can feel to me a bit pretentious and artificial to write something just to showcase a theme.
No, sure.
And I don't feel that that is what George does. I think they develop more naturally.
Yeah, I think he
has certain things that he likes to revisit that are just
touchstones.
Integral to the way he is as a writer.
Yeah. So I think this season, I can very well see where it ended up on the forum. It's not the best season. It's not the worst season. I think for many people, if they were to reread who've read the novels, will say that like a lot of the big highs weren't as big here. And still, you know, they don't achieve greatness, but they achieve better than okayness, they goodness. Greatness in a few points. Again, Oberyn and Tyrion himself, that's fantastic. They're able to create these turns, but as other things where they're like really iconic don't come through as you would want. And as I think they would have wanted, and I think they've just, it got away from them. And maybe again, it's a cost of 10 hours. And I can't recall now if I've already discussed the whole point about the 10 seasons. Did I discuss that in the first section?
10 seasons?
10 episodes. 10 episodes per season. Basically the whole fact that it's an artificial constraint put on them by HBO because HBO wants a yearly release cycle. And so, yes, 10 episodes is what they can do in 12 months. It's absolutely true. They cannot create more than 10 episodes in 12 months. But if they had 16 months, they could actually
have some insight into how late some of the episodes are.
Yeah, I mean, from your translation, you've had episodes come in that are said not complete, and it's a week prior, basically, to its airing. So it's absolutely true that they are extremely tight on the deadline. It's a lot of work, and they can't do more than 10. But it's completely HBO's choice to say, oh, well, we think it was a mistake of our predecessors to not release things on a yearly cycle. Like, oh, look at shows like The Wire or The Sopranos, where some seasons were like a year and a half, or even, I think, almost 2 years apart. And then you say, yeah, look at The Wire and The Sopranos.
On the other hand, look at people on Twitter. As soon as the last episode has finished, there's people going, what? I have to wait a year? Like, why aren't they releasing them right away?
They've kind of got a taste of what George gets, where he says, you know, it takes some years to write the books, and people are done reading it in a couple of days, and they want the next one already.
The idea that people are, unless they're just sort of acting on Twitter, or really, if they're really surprised that you have to wait a year between episodes, I guess because they're used to shows that run 16 or 18 weeks, and they're...
22 episodes is still the standard.
Oh, wow, okay. It's not really the standard for most shows in Europe, you know, the miniseries style of, you know, 4 episodes or 6 episodes or 8 episodes is quite common.
Yeah.
So the idea that it's not at all a foreign idea that you have to wait a whole year before something shows up again. And I see people sounding like they're completely flabbergasted.
Yeah.
So I can understand why HBO gets pressed into that, but it's bad, I think, to be pressed into the feeling that you have to keep delivering on that sort of schedule.
And I think it's a real question for the show going forward. I mean, one of the big topics is it going to go 7? In the latest interview, they're asked, are you...
Is it going to go 8, rather?
7
is going...
Well, it's going to go 7, but they don't know 7 or 8. And in the latest interview, they said 7 is the plan. Of course, as we know from reading George, plans change. But... And the reason I say that is they're not locked in at 7. They didn't say, usually just a big announcement when they have determined the final season. They'll say, this is the final season.
Yeah.
And usually you know a couple of years in advance. So maybe next year we're going to tell us at the premiere 2 more seasons and that's it.
Yeah. But as long as they're saying plan, that means it's not locked.
I'm dubious because I know it's not locked because in February when they talked to Vanity Fair, I'm fairly certain they had broken down that season already and they were... the 5th season, or the 4th season, or the 5th season. Sorry, they had already broken down the 5th season when they talked to him in February, and they said 7 or 8. So they do not see the 5th season that they have planned locking them at 7.
No.
Silver's room, and I think that's one of the interesting things.
It
No,
just
we're kind of
depends
going,
on how long
hold on a
they want
second.
to stay. And
Let's actually pause here and let's do a little final thoughts title card, because I think we've moved on to that now, and I just want to keep it nice and tidy.
Yeah.
So we're not locked in, but they may go 7, and I'm dubious about 7 myself. In part of it is just the notion that one more season would be nice to maybe give George a chance to catch up with them. I don't know the odds. He's working hard, as hard as he can on it, but
maybe
we'll
they
see.
can work a little harder
But
on
on the other
making
hand-
Belfast more cosmopolitan, so they like staying there.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I mean, a lot of it does sound like it comes down to their personal lives, and I can totally understand them. That they being away for so long from families is trying, and they are probably very tired a lot of time. I think they said one of the first things they're looking forward to when it's done is sleeping a lot.
Obviously, they didn't expect it to take off quite as much as it did.
And hey, that yearly schedule can't, having to hit that deadline can't be all that working so well. I mean, I certainly one of the things I could see is like a 7 split in half season where they kind of get a more lax shooting schedule and a bit of more chance.
6 episodes and 6 episodes maybe.
Usually you kind of go on even like 8 and 6 or something, or
Mm.
basically let them have a sort of a denouement that sort of spread out over a greater amount of time, so that they can basically get more of a recoup themselves. Partly I'm dubious about 7 just because you've got A Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons, and that's the thing. I mean, you've done, like, some characters haven't even touched that material. Some characters have gone all the way through that material. Some characters have part way through that material, and so you still have very substantial material. And can you do it all in one season? Sure. Can we trust that The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring can be done in a season each? I don't know. I think
obviously we know that they are going to cut some major storylines.
Yes, absolutely. We have to cut some things, and that's not a problem. I still think that the level.
Yeah.
I mean, to think of them taking Dany from where she is at the end of A Dance with Dragons to Westeros in the span of 2 seasons, given how much story they have, given that they're not afraid of adding story by going into Dorne,
True.
feels to me like they are maybe either they're prepared to do some really deep cutting, and I think unsatisfying cutting, to get to that 7 season mark, and then it feels like either there's a financial concern like HBO feels. I mean, Hollywood contracts tend to run about 6 seasons, and then you tend to renegotiate. So a lot of actors are up for renegotiation, I suspect.
And some of them were cheap, so to speak, when they started out.
Straight out of theater school, and now some of them have been in Hollywood films or starring in Hollywood films. Kit with the Pompeii. Emilia Clarke is the lead in the new Terminator movie, I believe. Yeah, it's entirely possible that they're going to be much more expensive, and so that's absolutely a factor. It's not unprecedented for cable shows to go 8 seasons, however. Although Dexter, I believe, went 8. Other shows have gone 7 at HBO. True Blood is going 7. So 7, 8 is. I don't see them going beyond 8.
No.
Even if it is too much. I mean, there you can kind of say like definitely the financials are going to be.
Yeah, I mean it's entirely possible that the amount of story in The Winds of Winter and The Dream of Spring could warrant 9.
Yeah.
But no, that's not happening. That's just.
I mean, just looking. I mean, let's predict. I was saying we were going to predict a little bit. I mean, Dany, she's going to go all the way for her Dance with Dragons material this season, 5th season. I'm certain of that.
You're certain of that?
All the way. I don't think she's going to go beyond it.
No, but you're certain they're finishing on the final chapter, I suppose. Her final chapter, I suppose.
Might be a little earlier. Might be the chapter before that.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil, but if you've read it, you know what we mean.
Yeah.
The Baratheon. Now, the North is the big question mark for me. That's the biggest, strangest story. I don't quite know how we're going to handle it, because that big list of casting, I don't think included any of the Northerners.
No.
Northern lords who kind of play a part of the story. They kind of made a nod to the Manderleys by having a Manderley guy at the Red Wedding. So
because if you just have the Boltons and Stannis, and yeah.
You have to have something because they didn't even say, you know, the Ironborn are running away. So what's the...
They're keeping Mance, but on the other hand, I find it very hard for their Mance to play the same role.
Yeah. Jon. I think he's going all the way for Dance of Dragons. I think he's the big... So the thing is, one of the things he learned is that Neil Marshall is not coming back for the 5th season. And he said, oh, if hopefully they have any other big battles coming, they'll call me in. Now, this does not mean that just because he's the battle guy for Blackwater and this Watchers on the Wall, that there are no battles. It's entirely possible that, I think it's David Nutter who's directing the last 2 episodes. It's entirely possible they'll have something, and just maybe on a different scale, small scale, or whatever.
Or they're still recovering budget-wise from...
Or we're still recovering budget-wise. I mean...
they may have to make it a little quieter.
They might have to make it a little quieter, and then that's why Jon makes sense to me as a completion point. But I don't know where Stannis goes. Sam, I don't think he's going to the Citadel. I don't think he's going to Old Town.
No.
He's sent there. I don't think it's happening. I could be wrong. I do think he might go on a journey, though.
Yeah.
And I think he might run into somebody else on that journey, but then he'll return. That's my guess. Bran, that's the one that makes us kind of leery of going on and even watching the season.
I really don't like being spoiled for the books, and especially I don't like being spoiled when it comes to the mysteries, the magic, all those elements.
For me...
And Bran is the one who's most likely to be digging into some of that.
I would like them to take his final Dance of Dragons chapter and split it in half and use the first part in like an appearance in the first or second episode and then save them to the very end. And then that way they don't get past it. They give us some really cool stuff, although we kind of have been hesitant to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that Bran is going to have a lot of story in the remaining books as it is. His story is going to be very low key.
I would have him showing up in people's dreams.
Yeah.
I would have him showing up.
In the books, I don't think, you know, he's not going to be moving around a lot.
No. Yeah, Reek, don't know where we're taking it. I mean, it's going to be quite changed. That's a big question. Yeah. Greyjoys, I think...
It's looking like they may be not appearing in this season.
I think we'll see Otter show up in the Iron Islands towards the end of the season or something.
Oh, I suppose so, because obviously she very much travels at the speed of plot. When sometimes it's very fast, sometimes it takes a whole season.
Sansa and Littlefinger. That's another one that could go into winter. Right now, I don't even know. They might completely scrap what George has planned, because so far they haven't even mentioned some of the things from...
The setup is not really there for...
No. Exactly. So
what they were planning to do. So
Arya pretty much gonna go for a Feast for Crows, Dance of Dragons material, I think.
Yeah. And even into some of the, we obviously had a chapter, a Mercy chapter for her. From
Brienne and Pod, I think they can go for a Feast for Crows material.
Yeah.
If they had Hot Pie and the Brotherhood without Banners mentioned, we could see that coming into play, and they could go back into that.
And then hopefully they could fit in a certain missing appearance from the final episode. If
Maybe
they work with the Brotherhood again, then that would make sense.
Tyrion, I don't see him going past the Dance of Dragons. I don't see him let's put it this way, I don't think he will end his journey meeting a certain Mother of Dragons. I don't think that'll happen. That's a guess, and again, these are guesses. But I'm just kind of, we've been discussing and considering, and we don't think they're going to go past it. It feels like a very natural points to end up on. Jaime,
aren't they going to end up with some battle material there, though? Can they work around that?
I don't think they're going to need that battle material, and I don't think they're going to have it.
Obviously, the lack of the iron.
The North may have something. The North is the one area, because we haven't heard anything, it kind of makes me suspicious that it might be kind of... And because I can't come up with anything else.
No.
But I think they're going to have enough. I think they're going to set up for, but that'll be for the 6th season.
Okay.
Just as it is in the books, basically. And,
we may have to put a spoiler warning when we start this section, I realize.
Yeah,
we'll
have had a big spoiler warning, so you'll know. So
you're still here, you did have a spoiler warning.
Yeah. Jaime. Now we know from the leaked audition stuff that he's going to be, and they even joked about it in the interview, that he has his jetpack. He will be going to Dorne, apparently. Well, okay, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
No, people have said outright he's going to Dorne.
Yeah. Can I take a moment here and just cry or something and shake my head and oh.
And I don't know if the jetpack also means he goes to Dorne and he goes to the Riverlands.
Yeah, Jamie.
And I mean, are we going to see the Riverlands? Are we going to see Riverrun? Are we going to find out what happened to, you know, Brennan Tully? What happens to Edmure?
He's still out peeing. He drank a lot.
Yeah, a lot of beer. That's our guesses, and then
Jamie.
There's one other thing from A Dance of Dragons, and this is my speculation. People are wondering about young Griff and Griff. I personally,
Sir is not appearing.
I don't think they're appearing this season. I can see them managing to squeeze it into something as a plot turn early on, sort of like when Barristan arrives at the end of that.
Yeah.
If they can do a sudden turn at the end, maybe at the very end of the season.
That would be, I think, indicative of, or we'll know probably then if they're going 8. I can see them squeezing in that storyline. Because otherwise they don't have time for it. I don't think. I think that's
my guess. I think that's how we're thinking.
Yeah.
But they are going. But that is a major storyline that could be a major dramatic point that could cause a lot of ripple effects, but would allow them the time and space and story to get to 8 very comfortably. And again, they're still going to have to be cutting tons, but they could get to 8 comfortably and say, we have a very compelling, action-packed, dramatic story with lots of cliffhangers and twists and turns that people want to keep watching.
Not necessarily making sense at the point they introduce things and how they're having to delay certain things and characters who may be showing up later than they should have, and it probably won't stand up to close scrutiny structurally.
I don't think they care.
Well, I think that's very obvious. Yes.
That's my guess. That's the big guess for me. And then the Iron Islands, again, because we haven't heard anything, it doesn't mean nothing is happening.
I mean, balance still seems to be alive.
Balance seems to be alive and well. I think that's where I kind of think, well, maybe does Osha show up at the end and then find out that he's dead, or he dies shortly after, or I don't know. I mean, and that's another thing where it's an element of the story where it feels to me like if we see it in season 6 or see them setting it up at the end of season 5. I don't know. It's there's a lot of questions, and it'll be interesting to hear what they do, and at the same time, it will be scary in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, it's a big task, and I mean, the thing for me is like the bits of A Feast for Crows I love best, and I think I will absolutely. It's not my favorite novel. Game of Thrones will always be my favorite novel in the series because it's like the first love is the introduction. It's how it's the most literary of the novels. Okay, it's the one that has some of the most beautiful prose, some of the most sort of elegiac, melancholic passages, and it has such a strong sense of theme of the decay, the collapse, the destruction, the Feast of Crows, and it runs in just about everyone's chapter, and it's about loss, and it's about how do you get back to civilization, how do you get back to law and order, and how do you find peace, and all these things that I find it very compelling. In fact, one of my big disappointments with Dance of Dragons was that George got away from that and and got more into a plot heavy focus. And I'm again, Game of Thrones is chock full of plot and it's my favorite. But I kind of was a little disappointed that when you get very plot heavy, the thematic thing. But
I think obviously the original intent for George
would be more balanced.
Would have been more of a balance where the thematic would have balanced the plot, and I think when he ended up splitting,
you end up getting one section that was extremely thematic.
Yeah, I don't know if that figured into the choices that he made for which characters had he put together. Partially it's by region, and maybe that's what controlled it, basically.
Yeah.
That the regions that ended up being put into Feast for Crows, the point of views, it fell naturally geographically, and it also ended up that those were the ones affected by this theme the most, whereas the action had moved out east and north.
Yeah, to me, and one of the things that was almost, I guess, a plus for the show, if they do it right, is, I mean, George had intended parallels between characters that when he split them up became less obvious. So for specifically, Cersei and Dany were supposed to be quite heavily parallel. And you're supposed to look at them both as two women ruling, the challenges, how they deal with it, and their stories reflecting kind of thematically one another. And that gets a bit lost when you split it apart into two separate books, and there's a separation of time and distance and so on. Now they can have that all at once in a season. And
well, that might be a little.
but they can have.
Well, it also might be a little much to expect them to manage to parallel something like that. Sorry, not having a lot of faith.
They may not have the convenience of time and space to be able to have that. They may not be able to do things that are so artful.
It's probably easier to convey in text as well.
Yeah. But. So I don't know, but that we'll save as our final thoughts. People have asked, are we going to just shut up for a year until the show starts up again? Or are we going to get back to doing Song of Ice and Fire videos? We've discussed a couple of videos that we want to do.
It was our plan last year as well, but we were busier with finishing up the World of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, but that's now done. Done.
Yeah. And
so we should have more time, and
have more time.
We'll
not
video,
4 Hour Monsters, but
no, but for discussing various points, and we'll probably solicit ideas for what people want to discuss. I know people want like discussing popular theories, stuff like Clegane Bowl. Short answer, hell no. Don't believe that one at all. Various other theories. So we'll kind of go through some and see what we have thoughts on and discuss and sort of shoot down and share our opinions. And they are our opinions. We don't generally have inside knowledge on these things, but we just,
and if we do, we try to pretend we don't, so you never know.
Yeah. We've never done that before.
No, right?
No.
No.
Until then, bye guys.
Bye.